is Spectrum.
Alternative medicine, homeopathy, secret society, hypnosis, the paranormal, alternative energy, UFO, abduction, the weird, the wild, and the wonderful.
With your hosts, Tom Theophanous and Scott Jordan.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Spectrum Radio Network on BBS Radio 2. This is Scott Jordan here with my co-host, Tom Theophanous, and remember, there's no such thing as too much information. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm good.
Well, tonight we have a spectacular guest. He is the founder and president of the Mars Anomaly Research Society. He's a team leader of Project Pegasus. He's a lawyer, a writer, a scholar, and a 21st century visionary. He's an emerging figure in the truth movement, leading campaign to lobby the U.S. government to disclose such controversial truths as the fact that Mars harbors life, that the U.S. has achieved quantum access to past and future events. His paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, published back in 2008, was the first work to prove that Mars is an inhabited planet. He is also one of America's early time space explorers. In the late 60s and early 70s, he was a child participant in the time-space exploration program of the U.S. Defense Technical Community, Project Pegasus. In that capacity, he was the first American child to teleport and took part in probes and past and future events, utilizing time travel technologies, then being researched and developed by D.A.R.P.A., which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. For over 10 years, Andy has investigated his experience in Project Pegasus on a quest to prove them and communicate them to others. Welcome, Andrew Basiago. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Scott. It's good to be on with you.
And thanks for coming. Wow, that's quite a resume you've got there. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about just a bullet point of the. I think we've pretty much covered your history, but maybe you can give us a bullet point version of it.
Well, I grew up in New Jersey and attended a public elementary school in north central New Jersey, and from a very young age, I was brought into the secret activities of the U.S. Defense Technical Community. These would be the government agencies and private defense contractors that were developing weapons and intelligence gathering devices for the U.S. President, intelligence community, and military. My father was a distinguished aerospace engineer who had worked on a number of classified aerospace projects in the 1950s before my birth in 1961. So at a very young age, beginning actually in the summer of 1967, which was the summer after my kindergarten school year, I was brought into Project Pegasus, which was the emerging time-space exploration program of the U.S. government. So my dad began to take me to different defense contractor locations that would be significant in the program that was unfolding, and that they had already there had been a determination to involve me in as I was going through my elementary school years in New Jersey. Today, I'm on the other side of the country. I'm a trial lawyer in Washington State, but I spent the last 10 years really going back and trying to essentially prove what happened to me, and I've done so. I've gathered hundreds of facts related to the people, the places, the technologies, and the experiences that I had as a child time traveler in Project Pegasus. And I hope to publish my book about both my experiences as a child and then the quest I went on as an adult to prove that Project Pegasus existed and that I was in it and it involved time travel. And I expect that book to come out in the middle of next year. So at this point, I'm simply sharing my experiences so that the people of the world know the truth, which is that time travel, different forms of time travel, were developed secretly by the United States government over 40 years ago. And we need to find out what was accomplished and what's been done since, because there are profound implications in terms of transportation, in terms of privacy, in terms of the geopolitical balance of power, in terms of where our energy infrastructure should be going, our transportation infrastructure. So right now I've been involved here for several years simply giving an account of what happened. It was highly peculiar, but at this point, I knew long before I launched my public campaign that what I had remembered being part of as a young child had actually happened. And during my quest to prove what happened, I was successful. I for example, gathered statements from project principals about the project. And so that's what I'm doing now is simply talking about what happened so that we can bring the world up to speed about these critical facts and then go about the business of determining what we should do with these time travel technologies once they begin to become declassified.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to be honest with our listeners and say I've been following Andrew's story for a couple of years now. I'm quite familiar with it. But there's always questions and details and things that you can tweak out of a story. I've heard interviews where you've added context to things that was broader context and more information. So I think that's what we're going to try and do here today, if that's okay with you, Andrew.
Certainly is.
Okay. I have a question about, and this is going to seem a little left field, but I would like to know the difference, if there is one, between the coronavisor, plasma confinement, Bortle tunnel, and the quantum plenum.
Okay. Well, the first three are time travel technologies. Plasma confinement was the most advanced and esoteric form of time travel that I was involved in. I was only involved in several time probes using that methodology.
Mm-hmm.
The plasma confinement was a form of quantum access in which plasma was placed under confinement in a lucite chamber, basically a big glassine chamber that was about twice the size of a squash court. And we entered the chamber was closed. We walked into the plasma that we could see hovering at the end of the chamber with all these beautiful neon colors.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been instructed that when we walked past the line on the floor into that field of plasma, we would start, basically, we would have a dropping sensation, and we would find ourselves shooting through the quantum plenum, which is this amber-colored realm that undergirds the holographic realm that we live in and call reality.
Right.
There is a foundation to the time-space continuum, and that is the quantum plenum. When I did that, I found myself not only having the sensation of falling, but of going through this cascading series of branching wormholes through the quantum plenum. That was the only time when I was involved in any of the 8 forms of quantum access that I was exposed to in Project Pegasus when I actually encountered wormholes, as depicted, let's say, in a film like What the Bleep Do We Know?
Mm-hmm.
When that transit through those wormholes ended, I found myself where they had sent me. For example, the trip that I took in the spring of 1972 to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, with the express purpose of trying to watch or observe President Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address on November 19th of 1863. I reached Gettysburg on that day via plasma confinement. The plasma confinement chamber that I entered was in a time lab in East Hanover, New Jersey, under the direction of Dr. Sterling Colgate, who during those years was the director of the New Mexico Institute of Science and Technology. He went on to a distinguished career in astrophysics at the Los Alamos National Labs. So he was, in a sense, the pioneer of plasma confinement. And in fact, during that was my second fact-finding trip to New Mexico in September of 2004. I went into the research library at New Mexico Tech and pulled out a newspaper article in which it was reported that Dr. Sterling Colgate of New Mexico Tech will be giving a lecture tonight on plasma confinement, and it bore a 1972 date. So that was one of the technical dimensions of the project that I linked up during my fact-finding. The chronovisors were an earlier technology in which two Vatican musicologists named Ernetti and Gemelli were studying the harmonic patterns in Gregorian chants in the 1940s at the Catholic University of Milan. And as they were fine-tuning a specialized microphone to split the voices in the chants, something that Father Gemelli's father had said to him in childhood came through the microphone, and they realized that they had essentially identified the collapsed signal of a past event and brought it into the present. And so working with Enrico Fermi, by 1952, they had a two-dimensional form of chronovision, something that looked like a TV set, a TV image. When I was first exposed to the chronovisors in Project Pegasus beginning in fall of 1970, now almost 20 years after Ernetti and Gemelli and Fermi had actually modeled a two-dimensional chronovisor image, I was exposed to moving three-dimensional images. Well, first, actually, I was shown the signing of the U.S. Constitution, and that was in a two-dimensional framework. But then when we were brought into the laboratories where the most modern chronovisors were being experimented with, we entered a room where we could see what looked like a cubical form of cinema. What they were doing was driving an electromagnetic signal through an octagonal crystal array of bismuth, which is element 83. And the significance of bismuth is that it has a complete proton shell and then one additional proton. And in discussions with modern time travel developers, we were theorizing that bismuth was used in the chronovisors because it catches that residual signal and then drives it through that proton shell and amplifies it. As my father said to me, I said, how is it working, Dad? How is it possible for them to set up these three-dimensional cinema-like images of past and future events so that we can see them in New Jersey in 1970? And he said, when we drive the EM signal through the bismuth, it has a lensing effect, like a magnifying glass. It brings, the chronovisor is an electro-optical device that brings that residual signal going on somewhere else in the quantum hologram, in the time-space continuum, identifies the signal, amplifies it, and then lenses it into the laboratory.
That's interesting.
Okay, so that's a technical remote viewing device when you're looking at the hologram. That's a window to a past or future event.
Right.
But what they found, well, if I might just complete this description, because what
absolutely.
they found is that when somebody stood in the hologram, they not only saw what was going on, they experienced being there. So they found that this electro-optical device that they originally thought would only have significance as a technical remote viewing device was in fact a form of time machine.
Okay. Now, I know of a book, Father Ernetti's Chronovisor, The Creation and Disappearance of the World's First Time Machine by Peter Krasa. Do you know if that detail is in there, about the bismuth? I'm just curious.
No, I'm sharing details. I'm familiar with Peter Krasa's book. In fact, I read it during my investigation. The first chapter contains facts that are relevant to the provenance of the chronovisor. The rest of the book is full of a lot of metaphysical writing that's almost irrelevant in terms of the whole time travel field. Mm-hmm. But it does contain some of the biographical information about Ernetti and Gemelli. I remember reading that data when we were being trained on Project Pegasus. No, I'm sharing data that I gleaned in asking questions of my father, who was one of the project engineers,
right,
and that was in the learning component about the chronovisors on the speed learning machines that they put us on to train us, which were called tachistoscopes, which had been designed by the Office of Naval Research and constructed at one of my dad's former employers, which was the Thomas A. Edison Research Labs in East Orange, New Jersey. I'm fairly certain, based on the fact that they were educating us in the actual, origins, structure, function, and effects of the different time travel devices, that basic account involving those two Vatican musicologists was in fact the derivation of the chronovisor. As Ernetti said,